In 1962, Hollywood made a movie called The Manchurian Candidate, about an American politician who is beloved by the public, waves the flag harder than a car dealership on the 4th of July, says all the right things about putting America first, and is secretly, completely, catastrophically compromised by a foreign enemy. Every decision he makes that looks like strength is actually designed to weaken his own country and benefit the people who own him. The audience sees it immediately. The characters in the movie never do. That's the whole point. The best puppet is the one that doesn't look like a puppet. It just looks like a very enthusiastic patriot. I kept thinking about that movie this week while I was reading SEC filings and semiconductor supply chain reports instead of studying for finals, which is not how most journalism students spend their Saturday nights. But most journalism students aren't writing for an independent publication that covers things the mainstream press won't touch. So, here we are. Everybody thinks the war in Iran is about oil. Every cable news segment is about gas prices. Every pundit on every channel is standing in front of a graphic of an oil barrel, explaining how the Strait of Hormuz closure is going to affect the price of filling up your F-150. And that story makes sense if you don't think about it for more than 30 seconds, because the Strait of Hormuz handles a huge percentage of global oil traffic, and shutting it down does make oil more expensive. But here's the thing that nobody on cable news seems to want to mention. The United States produces 13.58 million barrels of oil per day, more than any country on Earth. We just took Venezuela and its 303 billion barrels of reserves. Canada has 163 billion more next door. America does not need Middle Eastern oil. We haven't needed it for years. The shale boom made us energy independent, and the Venezuela operation sealed it. So, if the war isn't about oil for America, what is it about? It's about helium. And I realize that sentence sounds like something a crazy person would say. But stay with me, because this is the most important thing you are going to read this week, and possibly this year. Helium. The gas that fills birthday balloons and makes your voice sound like a chipmunk at parties. That's what 99% of Americans know about helium. Here is what 99% of Americans do not know. Helium is the single most critical input in the fabrication of every advanced semiconductor chip on the planet, and there is no substitute for it. None. Zero. Not one. Every chip in your phone, your laptop, your car, your hospital's MRI machine, every Nvidia GPU powering AI, every piece of high-bandwidth memory in every data center on Earth requires helium to manufacture. During the lithography process that etches circuits onto silicon wafers, fabs blow helium over the back of the wafer to maintain temperature uniformity so the etching doesn't warp. During vacuum chamber testing, helium is used for leak detection because it's the smallest element that exists, and if helium can't escape, nothing can. The purity requirement is 99.9999%, which the industry calls 6N. And if you're wondering whether you can just use birthday balloon helium, you cannot, in the same way that you cannot perform open-heart surgery with a butter knife. There are only a handful of facilities on Earth that can produce helium at this purity. Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city produced approximately 1/3 of the world's helium supply, roughly 2.4 billion standard cubic feet per year, as a byproduct of liquid natural gas processing. On March 2, 2026, Iranian missiles hit the facility. Qatar Energy shut everything down and declared force majeure. On March 18th to 19th, more missiles hit, causing what Qatar Energy called extensive damage. 14% of Qatar's helium capacity is permanently destroyed, with a reconstruction timeline of up to 5 years. The planned Helium-4 plant, which would have been the largest helium facility ever built, is delayed indefinitely. Helium spot prices have doubled, contract surcharges are up 70 to 100%, and here's the detail that makes this a ticking clock instead of just a supply disruption. Liquid helium in transport containers starts to evaporate after 35 to 48 days. There are containers of helium stranded right now in the Persian Gulf that were bound for South Korea and Taiwan. And every day they sit there, the helium inside them is disappearing into the atmosphere permanently, because once helium escapes into the air, it rises to the top of the atmosphere and leaves Earth forever. It does not come back. South Korea imported 65% of its helium from Qatar in 2025. Taiwan imported 69% from Gulf countries. Samsung and SK Hynix, which together produce roughly 2/3 of the world's memory chips, are in South Korea. TSMC, which makes the logic chips for basically everything, is in Taiwan and imports 97% of its energy and holds only 11 days of gas reserves. These are the companies that manufacture every Nvidia GPU, every AMD AI accelerator, every Google TPU. Over $200 billion has been wiped off Samsung and SK Hynix's combined market value since the war started. The entire Western AI infrastructure buildout, the $1 trillion+ that hyperscalers like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are spending on data centers, depends on chips that depend on helium that is currently evaporating in stranded containers in a war zone. Now, here's where the Manchurian Candidate part comes in, because there is exactly one country on Earth that is not getting screwed by any of this, and I bet you can guess which one. China has a domestic helium plant in Guangdong province that just received 6N purity certification and is an approved supplier for ASML, the company that makes the lithography machines. Chinese domestic helium production is small right now, 1.2 million cubic meters in a market measured in billions, but it is growing fast, specifically because of this crisis, which accelerated investment. China is also negotiating the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which would deliver Russian LNG directly into China, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely. This pipeline has been stalled for years over price disputes. But China now has enormous leverage because they desperately need to diversify off Qatar, and Russia desperately needs a buyer. If that pipeline gets done, and there is every indication it will, China secures both its own helium supply and its own energy supply, which means it can build a fully independent, fully native chip fabrication stack, while Taiwan and South Korea starve. CNBC ran a headline on April 10, 2026, how Russia could profit from Iran war helium supply chain disruption in the chip sector. Russia profits, China profits. The Western semiconductor supply chain burns. And the country that started the war, the United States of America, is the country whose allies are getting destroyed by it. In The Manchurian Candidate, the audience can see what's happening. The characters can't. They're too busy waving flags. Speaking of people who seem to know what's going to happen before it happens. On March 23, 2026, $580 million in oil futures trades were placed in a 15-minute window, starting at 6:49 a.m., 15 minutes before Trump posted on Truth Social that he was pausing strikes on Iran. Trading volume at 6:50 a.m. was 6 times the normal volume. Rep. Richie Torres called it potentially one of the largest instances of insider trading in history. His exact words, "The only plausible answer to that question is an insider trader. Any other alternative is a statistical impossibility." It happened again on April 7, when 50 newly created Polymarket accounts. Polymarket is funded in part by Donald Trump Jr., bet heavily on a ceasefire before it was announced. The White House responded by sending a staff-wide email warning employees not to insider trade, which is the kind of email you send after someone already did it. Meanwhile, Jared Kushner, one of Trump's Iran envoys, is simultaneously raising billions for his private equity fund from Persian Gulf governments entangled in the war. And the DOJ Public Integrity Section, the office created after Watergate, specifically to prosecute corrupt officials, has been reduced from 36 lawyers to 2. The cop shop is closed. But oil is the obvious play. Oil is the trade that every journalist is watching. Oil is where you get caught, because Reuters is staring at the CME ticker 24 hours a day. If you wanted to make money from advanced knowledge of this war without anyone noticing, you wouldn't trade oil. You'd trade something nobody is looking at, something obscure, something on a Canadian stock exchange with zero oversight and zero media attention, something like helium. Avanti Helium, a tiny Canadian exploration company, is up nearly 300% in 2026. Pulsar Helium is up 150%. Desert Mountain Energy is up over 100%. These are microcap stocks that most financial journalists couldn't find on a map. Nobody is scrutinizing their trading records. Nobody is checking who bought shares in January and February before the missiles started flying. Nobody is asking whether accounts connected to people with advanced knowledge of the Iran operation quietly loaded up on the one commodity that would skyrocket once the bombs started dropping on Ras Laffan. And then there's Rep. Ro Khanna, who sat on the AI caucus and the high-tech caucus and the antitrust caucus, which are the committees that would have had briefings about semiconductor supply chain vulnerabilities. In late 2025, before the war, Khanna aggressively sold his positions in ASML Holdings, makes the EUV machines that need helium. Micron Technologies makes memory chips that need helium, and Ultra Clean Holdings, semiconductor equipment. He dumped the exact stocks that would be most damaged by a helium shortage months before a helium shortage happened. Was it insider trading? Can't prove it. Was it the most convenient timing in the history of congressional stock sales? You tell me. I am going to make a prediction. Within 12 months, someone is going to pull the trading records on these helium microcaps and find a pattern of suspicious purchases in January and February 2026 by accounts connected to people who had advanced knowledge of the Iran operation. I am a journalism student, finishing my degree while writing for an independent publication that doesn't have a legal department, a corporate sponsor, or a single editor who went to Columbia. I am not the person who should be figuring this out. I should be the 10th person to report on it, after the Wall Street Journal and Reuters and Bloomberg already broke the story. But they're not looking. They're writing about oil prices, because that's the story everyone already understands. And the helium story requires you to explain something complicated to an audience that thinks helium is for balloons. So I'm telling you now, before the financial press catches up, the war in Iran is not about oil. It is about who controls the supply chain that makes the computers that will run the world for the next 50 years. And right now, the only country positioned to control that supply chain is China. Every piece of this benefits China. The helium shortage, the energy disruption, the stranded supply chain, the gutted enforcement, the insider trading, the pipeline, the domestic helium program, all of it. In The Manchurian Candidate, the question the audience keeps asking is he stupid or is he compromised? The characters in the movie think he's a patriot. The audience knows better. Right now, America is watching its own semiconductor supply chain get dismantled by a war that its own government started. And the only people benefiting are the Chinese government and whoever placed those trades at 6:49 a.m. Is this incompetence? Or is someone 5,000 miles east of the Strait of Hormuz smiling right now? I don't know, but I know what it looks like. And if you've seen the movie, you know too. If you got this far, you now know more about helium and its role in the AI supply chain than approximately 99.9% of the American public, most of Congress, and every anchor who covered the Iran war as an oil story this week. You're welcome. A paid subscription keeps this publication running, keeps us investigating the stories that every major outlet is either too lazy or too compromised to touch, and keeps at least one journalism student believing that independent media can still do what the institutions won't. Every major outlet missed this story because it requires explaining something complicated to people who don't want to think about complicated things. Liked this article? Share it with someone who still thinks the Iran war is about gas prices. They deserve to know what it's actually about.